I think it's just always good to like keep the timeline in front of us, because this is really our goal, is to understand like this is a story. I have belabored that hopefully until you guys can say it in your sleep. What we can say, it's a story, and we're understanding the story, a true story, right? The story of God. So we're adding to that today. But let's just pick up where we left off. Like we had a pretty intense few chapters last week. The beginning of Exodus. We saw God do cosmic level spiritual warfare as he like beat up, and that's an understatement, the gods of Egypt, and he delivered his people, his chosen people. He was taking a nation. Oh, I forgot to put the verse in here. But there's a verse in one of the prophets. Has any other God taken a people for himself out from another nation by war and all these things? And it's like, no, there's no other God that's done that. You're the only one. And we're supposed to see that and just be in awe. And so, again, God he thinks the Exodus was a pretty big deal. So if he thinks this probably was a pretty big deal. But that was last week. And Israel, what did they do? They plundered Egypt by just saying, hey, neighbors, give us your gold. And so all of the gold that was stored up through Jacob and saving people from the famine, Israel walked out of Egypt with all that gold. And so God set them up for success. And that's where we are. They're leaving Egypt. They're leaving Egypt. Who is going to have a hard time with that, though? Who gets upset?
Israelites.
The Israelites. They do eventually, but like right here, chapter 14.
Oh, they were Pharaoh.
Pharaoh, yeah. God hardens his heart again, not Pharaoh. God hardens his heart. And so somebody tell me the story. Like we're coming into the wilderness, and you guys have watched probably the movie. Tell me about this. What happens next? What happens when Pharaoh? I'll stop. What happens next?
They go to the wilderness, and Pharaoh's like, no, we can't let them leave. They start chasing them down. They see him over, like, coming towards them. But then they kind of, the Israelites start panicking. But then there's like a pillar cloud or pillar fire at night that like they separates them. And then like they sleep.
Good. As Paul's there. Question. Did you guys pick up on what the pillar was? Said who? What the pillar was. Yeah, it's just like, it's kind of tucked in there, but it says the angel of the Lord moved, and then the pillar went as he moved. And so the angel of the Lord, this character that we've talked about a few times, he moves in front of the Israelites in between the two armies, and the pillar moves with them. So we looked at the pillar last week, the pillar of cloud thing, and the fire, and you're like, well, that's cool. But then you find out today, or in this section, that it's the angel of the Lord is probably that pillar. But who is the angel of the Lord way back? We've run across him a few times.
It's like God.
It's like God, but then it's not, but then it is. The angel of the Lord was in the burning bush, and then it was God, and then it was the Lord. And you're like, well, wait a second, is it the angel or the Lord, or what's going on? And we saw him embodied, I think, speaking to Abraham. I think that was the angel of the Lord. So who this figure, the angel of the Lord, is, like, I don't know, but we're being set up well for there to be like multiplicity within God. Like he's embodied in different ways, but yet he is one. He's one God. So this is just something cool that I wanted to point out. So all right, so yeah, you're right. The pillar moves in between the two armies, I guess, Israel and the oncoming Egyptians. All right, so we've got the stage set. What happens next? Somebody knew.
Yeah, they like sleep, even though they're like close by.
Yep.
It's like that barrier is there between them. So, and then in the morning or the next day, God tells Moses to put his staff out of the water, and then God separates the water, and then they go across. It was like they went across during the night though, and when they got across, like it was dawn. They said, so I was like, must have been darker, I guess.
Yeah, good job picking up those little stuff. I didn't even notice that. That's good.
I was like, dawn, so they went at nighttime. I always think about during the day and it's bright, it's not like dark and it's hard to see and underwater. It's like Not great.
Yeah. So the big thing, right, it's in the movie and all that, is Moses parts the Red Sea. Well, the Lord parts the Red Sea through the staff. I think it's Aaron's staff is the one that's doing this. And so the staff, no, he doesn't strike the water. He raises the staff up. I don't think he strikes the water. And God sends a wind, and it separates the waters. And I think that, like, the separation of waters, we've heard stuff like that before, right? In the creation narrative. And I think what's happening, this is how the Hebrew Bible works. It keys us in on themes of God, like separating the chaotic waters, and they're walking through. So they go in, but what happens? They go in, and who doesn't make it through that event? The Egyptian army, right? So God delivers them simply by the Egyptians go in, and the water, it comes back against them. What's interesting, though, is the angel of the Lord, even before that, he's like fighting the armies of the Egyptians. He's making their carts not roll. And so crazy stuff. God is actually fighting for them. And so they get to the other side, and we see chapter 15 pick up. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything in that. Yep.
I thought that was cool.
Good job.
It was like how he was like, the angel of the Lord would like wrench the wheels and just different stuff like that. Just sort of like little things that like affected the majority of people.
Yeah. Cool. So the chapter, I think the chapter ends this way. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Did y'all see that verse? And Israel saw the great power of the Lord against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and his servant Moses. Cool. Chapter 15. You look at the notes, but chapter 15 is a hymn of praise for deliverance. And so just a couple things I wanted to highlight here, and then I want to move on from this chapter. But the hymn recounts the deeds, giving descriptions of Yahweh's actions. So basically, if you just want to know like what this hymn is, here's some key points. So it tells the deeds, like what God did, but it uses some like really fanciful descriptions of what happened. But basically, they're on the other side and just like singing praise for what God just did. So the next one is the hymn proclaims the response by the nations surrounding that heard of what Yahweh did. So they're like, the Moabites and the Edomites and all these people around us, they're going to be terrified because Yahweh just kicked butt, took names, delivered us from Egypt. And so that was the response that God wanted. He wanted to make a name for himself in the earth. And all the nations, they're like, what is this people coming out here? Like, their God is mighty. And that's part of it. A couple verses. In verse 3, they say this of the Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Like, the Lord is a warrior. He's mighty. The next one that I pulled out, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? And we talked about this. Like, God is showing that he is like the top dude. Like all these other divine beings that hold sway over the nations, that he separated at the Tower of Babel. He's like, God alone. Like, who is like him among the gods? That's the question. And the answer is no one. Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders? So that's just a hymn. You can read through it, but it's basically what it is. So, but after their deliverance from the Red Sea crossing, the people faced their first trial. Like, imagine this though. Like, you really gotta set the scene. They just got delivered from Egypt. They just walked through the Red Sea, and it split. And the Egyptian army was like totally crushed. And then they face a trial. And, like, we got to give them some slack. What we're about to look at is cut them some slack, because it's like, we would probably grumble too. But God didn't respond too well for it. But the first trial is they go 3 days without finding water. They came back to the place. They came to a place with water, but it was bitter. And what do they do? What's the kind of the key word that they start doing through this section? Grumbling. Yeah, they start grumbling. And verse 24. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And What did God instruct Moses to do? Don't look at the notes. What did God instruct Moses to do?
Wasn't it to strike a rock?
Not yet,
It's
but keep that in mind because
it's like a salty or something nasty tasting little oasis, and you have to throw a piece of wood in it.
yeah. I don't know if it gives a description of like what was wrong with the water, but it was bitter. Yeah.
That's where.
But the second thing he said, absolutely. So he sees a log and throws a log into it. And some people make connections between that and the cross. I think that's a little stretch, but there's a log thrown into the water and waters are made. But what's interesting is they grumbled, and God's response at this point is just gives provision. And I think this is important. Like we've talked about, God is slow to anger. Like we get to watch this for like their whole life of the nation is like grumble, 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 and you know he'll say stuff like corrective, but he's slow to anger, and we're seeing this. He answers with mercy here. So log in water. Good job. Somebody read that verse, Exodus 15:25 through 26 in the notes.
There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them. Do you want to read them?
Yeah, finish those verses.
Okay. If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the disease on you, and I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer.
Good job. Yeah. So right here he says, I'm going to put a test before you that if you will diligently listen to my voice, how does he say it? And do what's right. You know, I'm not going to put the plagues on you that I put on Egypt, but why? He states something at the bottom. Did that sound familiar to you guys? That emboldened part? I'm the Lord your healer. Has anybody heard Jehovah Rapha? That name of God, Jehovah Rapha. It's God, or the Lord our healer, is where we get this from. So he's stating part of his relationship with him. I'm the Lord your healer. Your healer. And he's going to be putting tests before the nation to see, are they going to continue to grumble against me and not walk in my statutes? But if they will, like, I'm their healer. That's his title. That's his identity in this section. Yeah, so, cool. Any questions on that chapter or comments you guys had? Really, from 14 or 15, I forgot to stop. But through this section, anything you guys wanted to bring up or highlight?
You pointed out what I was going to say.
Okay, what was it?
Like when they were singing about who are you among the gods, how like it still had the lowercase, like
Yeah.
acknowledging, yeah, there are more, but I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what are they compared to you?
Yeah. Good way to catch that. That's important. Like these are part of the story here. Is that these gods, they do exist. They are divine beings, not in the pluralistic way that we've understood it, but they're out there. You know, there's divine beings that are rebellious, but God's the creator. Yahweh's the creator. So cool. So chapter 16, we'll just cruise through this, but we got the next thing, and they're grumbling for food. And it begins a really pattern, and they see the glory. Three primary things that happens in this chapter. We see the grumbling for food, so that's their next problem. The glory of Yahweh appears in the wilderness, and there's the provision of manna. But sorry, I'm just running through this. I really should have y'all tell me the story of it. But in this chapter, one thing to really highlight and pick up on is we see the cycle of grumbling continue. So it started, but now it's just continuing. The Israelites grumble for food against Moses and Aaron. But I don't know if you guys caught it, but Aaron and Moses are quick to clarify, you guys aren't grumbling against us. What are we? You guys are actually grumbling against the Lord in what you're doing. And so, like, I don't know, I want to get pastoral for a minute. Like, whenever we go to really grumble against our leadership or stuff like that, we need to recognize that they may even be off in some things. But that spirit of grumbling, in a lot of ways, is not just directed at the flesh and blood. So, I don't know. just think that's a weighty thing to mention. And I'm talking about like grumbling and gossiping. There is room, obviously, for like discussing things with people, but yeah, I'll leave that alone. Somebody read that verse, Exodus 16:3. It's talking about when they were in Egypt. And tell me what you think about it.
Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger.
What do y'all think about that? It's like your first response when you read that.
It's kind of like, bro, it's just like, God's done all this for you. You think he's just going to take you out here to make you die from hunger? He just provided water for you.
Yeah.
He can easily make some, what is this?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's kind of what I was thinking, like, I know maybe nowadays we still take some things for granted, but especially, like, if you look in the eyes of the ancient Israelites, they're like, you see miracle after miracle was falling, like, all the plagues are affecting the Egyptians, and didn't have to affect any of them. I mean, all the firstborn of the Egyptians were killed, none of theirs were.
Yeah.
They went through a sea. They walked through a sea.
Walk through a sea.
And I was thinking like, oh, God's gonna send a star. I was like, really?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's kind of the big point too. But what else in here? What do they say about their time in Egypt?
They enjoyed it, is what they sound like.
It's like,
Yeah.
we were fat and happy.
Yeah.
It's like, right, you were dying.
It's almost like, it's crazy how much like what you feel in that moment can overtake like the reality of it.
Good point. Good point. Yeah. What you feel in the moment can really overtake the reality of it. Yeah. So, I think we put the key in on this stuff. So, but again, slow to anger. What does the Lord do in reply?
Fix the manna. Tells them about the manna.
Yeah.
And like the portions you're supposed to get.
Okay. Tell us about that. Talk loud.
Okay, so it's a bunch of different portions. It was like, they told them to get just the right amount, I think is what it said. But then some people got more, and then some got a little less. But everybody had just enough in the end.
Right.
But it's kind of like dew turned into bread flakes. So they called it manna, which means, what is this?
Yep.
How about that? Yo, what is this? Perfect name.
What is this? Yeah.
I love that. So good. So
What did it taste like?
bread. That was,
The manna? It told us what it tasted like. Did anybody pick up on it?
oh, it was like honey and something. It was like sweet honey something.
Yeah. It's like wafers with honey.
Like,
Yeah, I don't know. That's like, if I'm going to eat breakfast, because it came in the morning, and then it said that he sent quail to eat in the dinner time. But if I'm going to eat breakfast, like, honey wafers sounds really good to me. And it was like coriander seed in color. I don't know what coriander seed looks like, but yeah, I use coriander though. Anyway, but like that's a pretty good. It sounds pretty good. And I don't know. This is speculation, but like I wonder what the nutritional value of that was. Like how much it really sustained them. And they ate that for the entire 40 years that they were in the wilderness. I don't know if y'all saw that, but that's crazy. Like at some point, I admit it would probably get old, but
honey wafers every morning.
yeah, but I don't know. That's part of the grace of the Lord that He would, I don't know, sustain that.
I thought it was cool too how like if they did gather extras, especially like on the Sundays when they weren't supposed to, like if they did, it would like instantly like start to rot and
Yeah.
maggots. It just gets super nasty.
Yeah, so that's something we need to point out is that God gave them this thing and told them how to collect it. And this is part of that testing. I'm going to put before you this thing, and I want you to do it in my ways. And as part of the test that we talked about, did they obey that? Not everybody did. Not everybody did. And again, like we're supposed to pick up through these stories that like the Israelites were right off not being obedient. And guys, like we have to talk about there's a place for a big place, a primary place for obedience to the Lord. And the reason though that we have to keep that in mind is that His ways, He's creator, leads to life. And we may not fully understand it sometimes, but his ways lead to life. And so I have to trust him that his ways are good and lead to life. And that's what he's doing. He's like, I want you to walk in my ways. This may seem arbitrary, not important, but obey me. And it will lead to life. It will lead to life. Yeah, so some didn't listen. Moses got angry. The Lord, it didn't say got angry, but Moses got angry at him. But the Lord brought provision. Brought provision. So later Jewish speculations and stuff said that when the Messiah came, that the manna from heaven would again fall to the earth, that he would provide the bread of heaven. And some would say that when Jesus talked about, I am the bread of life, like I am the one that gives the eternal life and brings life on that day, he was kind of talking within that tradition of the Messiah when he comes and gives eternal life will cause the manna to fall again. I don't know if that's right or not, but I always thought that was cool. So, cool. Chapter 17. Don't look at the notes. Will, what happened?
Is this when he splits the rock?
Yeah, good chapter. You got it. Water from the rock. So tell us the story of what happened, if you can. Don't worry if you can't. I'll fill it in.
So I know they were complaining about not having water. They were grumbling again.
They were grumbling.
I
Yeah.
think Moses was kind of like getting irritated with them again. Because that's kind of when I felt like Moses was kind of getting a little annoyed with them. The entirety of like the readings, what he had to do. And getting God just like strike the rock and water.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting how, I mean, I kind of give props to Moses for dealing with a few million people civilization grumbling. That's pretty toxic. So
That's pretty
it's
toxic.
pretty toxic. A few million people grumbling about
Yeah.
water. That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So I feel that. But also, is this the instance where he strikes it when he's not supposed to and he gets cursed, or is that later?
So no, that's not in our section.
Okay, that's later.
Will wanted to tell us about that though, about the rock. So you mentioned it earlier. So well, let's just make sure we don't miss anything. No, okay, never mind. We won't miss it. But so yeah, what was the answer? You just said it there. So there's not water. They're grumbling, and what does God say? You just said it. One of you guys can. What does God tell Moses to do?
To strike it?
Yeah, like you said, to just go in front of the people, take the staff, and strike it. What's interesting is the first time the rock that followed him in the wilderness, the New Testament says that rock that provided water actually followed them in the wilderness. Now, that may be allegorical, probably is a little bit, but that rock actually was a type or a prefigurement of Christ, providing water for them in the wilderness. The New Testament reflects back on it. Interesting. The first time that we see the rock, it's struck, and it provides life-giving water when it's struck. The second time, Moses is supposed to speak to it. Moses is supposed to speak to it. And I think we would have been given a beautiful picture of a first and second coming of the Messiah, where the rock is struck, but then the next time it's not, and it gives water. But Moses disobeys, and God takes that really seriously, that second disobedience, and it could be because this is supposed to communicate to the people a prefigurement of the Messiah. I hope that made sense. Yeah, so cool thing there. But last thing I picked up on this in that section was when God said to go and do this. I'll just read it. Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb. I just like, whenever I see stuff like that, like the Lord embodied standing before them on the rock, stuff like that I can't get past it. Like we're seeing God in different ways than some of our Greek-mindedness of like he has no material, he's not real, he's just there. But like God stands before them on the rock and he strikes it and water comes out. So
Seems like God's taking physical form quite a lot. And I never realized. Like the angel of the Lord, or he's there, it's like standing, like was really cool to see.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so the Hebrews would have had a completely different understanding of God's like form and really like spiritual things. Their form would have a completely different understanding of that than the Greek mindset, which we went through that stuff like the heavens and the earth and stuff like that. But we're seeing that the reason why it's just like an earthy, real existence that they're encountering. So cool. Last thing we see in this chapter is the defeat of Amalek. Real quick, somebody just tell me just the nuts and bolts of the defeat of Amalek, if you read through that. It's short, but it's like really good sermon note stuff. Has to do with Moses' hands in the air.
Oh yeah, he's got all, and they come and they sit him in a rock or something, and they hold his hands up, standing up. So
Yeah.
like the battle's won as long as his hands are up. So they had to help him hold his arms up.
So Joshua is down in the valley fighting, and Moses has to hold his hands up, but his hands get tired and they come and help him. So you guys can preach all kinds of sermons about that stuff. So you gotta remember that.
It also kind of foreshadows the next one with Joshua, like something still kind of, because it's like that's soon to come,
Yeah,
kind of.
yeah, cool. Yeah, and so this would have just been, Amalek would have just been like a little nation that's having a problem with Israel coming through their land. Is kind of the situation there. Chapter 18, we won't talk about this one much, but this is the one with Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. You guys may, if you've heard this, you'll remember, but basically Jethro comes and meets Moses, because remember he had left him. He comes and delivers the people. But Jethro, his father-in-law, just says, hey, you're working too hard, and everybody's coming up to you, and you've got no rest all day. You need to divide the people into 50s, and I forget the exact numbers, but 50s and 10s and stuff. So, like, leadership lesson from your father-in-law is what we saw there. But, questions or comments on the sections that we've come up to? We're about to kind of hit the main area that I wanted to talk about today. So,
I had like a mini connection, I think.
Okay.
It might be really off, but Moses is to divide leaders into certain groups.
Mhm.
So like leader over this group, instead of Moses having to handle it all. And it kind of reminds me of like the divine council. So like God's the head of it. So like he divided it between other like gods or divine beings
Yes.
among the nations. Kind of
Totally.
similar in that.
yeah, man, that's all right. It's good. That might be a very good connection, actually. So later the elders of Israel are brought up, and there's, or talked about, and we'll look at them, and there's 70 of them. And the way they are like anointed by the Lord and by the Spirit, they go out and like prophesy and stuff. Well, later the apostles, when they're given the Spirit and they prophesy, it's almost like God's stamping new elders to lead the people. And so that might be kind of what that's falling on. But we're not in that section this week, so we won't get there. But okay, this is the main thing. I don't think this will take the rest of our time, but y'all know me. So let's look back at our timeline here. We talked about the different covenants. We looked at the Abrahamic covenant, saw that passed down, right? Abraham, like, I'm going to give you a great nation, the land, all those things. And through your seed, through your nation, your people, your descendants, I'm going to bless all the nations of the earth. Well, we're looking at some of the story of that nation that's going to bring blessing to the rest of the earth. And man, God is merciful, right? Like, dang, he's going to use them. Praise the Lord. And so, but here, we see now God, through this covenant, and we're going to look at some of the structure of it. He is now entering into covenant, not just with a man, but now he is entering into covenant with the whole nation. This is an incredibly significant point that we hit in the storyline. And so I want us to, the timeline doesn't do very good with it, but like this is the next of our covenants. So the C word of covenant, this is the next one. So you got Abraham, Moses, David, and then the new covenant but this is the covenant with Moses, covenant on Sinai. This is a national covenant. You can look at this, I just highlighted basically on this screenshot. I thought about actually just us reading through it. But you can look at the significant portions through it, and I kind of noted them below. Let's see, what's the best way to go about this? Yeah, we'll just go through the story of it. So they arrive at Sinai. Anybody remember? No, you probably wouldn't because it was a different name. The Mount Sinai. This is the first place where Moses encountered Yahweh. So the burning bush, that actually happened here at Mount Sinai. It was called Horeb, the mountain of God, I think, when Moses got there. But the Lord actually said, one of the signs, Moses, that I'm with you is that when you deliver the people, if you're not convinced by them, you'll be back at this mountain again and worshiping here. So they have come all the way back around, and he's now brought the people back to the mountain of God where the burning bush was. Let's see, the people remain at this mountain throughout the entire book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus is just recounting laws that God received, or that Moses received from God, so that they know how to lead the nation. So the book of Leviticus, more or less, happens here. And the first 10 chapters of Numbers as well. And I'm pretty sure the rest of Exodus, would happen here too. So we're here for a while. We're camped out. We're at Sinai. So this covenant between, I'm going to try and test you guys' memory back to your Old Testament class. But I'll fill it all in as we go through. But this covenant, we talked about the Abrahamic covenant being a unilateral covenant, if you guys remember, where basically the big dude says to the little dude, I'm going to do these things for you. There is maybe one kind of initial act of obedience, but like after that, it's not based on necessarily what you're doing. Abraham, I'm going to accomplish my will through you, indeterminate. And in the unilateral, so like one directional, there isn't like this ongoing, you do this for me, I do this for you. You do this for me, I do this for you. Okay, that was the covenant with Abraham. I'm going to do this, Abraham. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to do all these things. The covenant with David that we'll see next semester, I guess. It's a unilateral. David, I'm going to put a king on your throne, and he's going to rule over the earth. This one's different. This covenant is different with the nation. And I cannot stress how significant it is that God is covenanting himself with this nation. Like the rest of the Bible, I need to say this at some point, but the rest of the Bible is based on and focused around the fact that God has just covenanted himself with this nation and the rules and stipulations that he hands them. And if I forget to bring that back up, somebody remind me. So this is a bilateral covenant. An example I wanted to give of a bilateral covenant would be a marriage covenant. So in a marriage covenant, you have you swear your vows to one another. So you're saying, I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to do this for you till death do us part. All that good stuff. And in a marriage covenant, like you guys are committed. Like this is a life binding agreement where there's like a deep relationship, right? What happens if one of the people in that relationship doesn't follow up their end of the covenant and breaks their vows?
Covenant's broken.
It's bad. Like, yeah. In a human sense, in a human covenant, very much like they could break the covenant. The breaking of the covenant would be a divorce, right? That would be like our covenant is off. And but until that moment, like there's still like consequences for the covenant. So in a marriage covenant, let's say the guy just acts up. What's the consequences? Well, he's sleeping on the couch, right? So there's relational consequences here. And in a covenant, well, we'll get to that actually in just a minute. But a marriage covenant is a great example of a bilateral. Like, I promise to do this for you, and there's great blessings and perks, right? But you got to do this and fulfill your side of the covenant too. And that's what we're looking at here. What we're about to, or at least in this moment, God is making a bilateral, very similar to a marriage type covenant with this nation. He's entering into, some have actually called it a marriage covenant with this nation. That's intense. Like, that's intense. God's heart is bound up with this nation. So let's go through this. Do you guys remember from Old Testament? I think it was called the Suzerain Treaties. Suzerain Treaty, I think is what it was. Or maybe that's a Suzerain Vassal Treaties. I copied and pasted from our Old Testament book, basically the steps. But in the ancient world, it's called the ancient Near East. You guys have heard that term. In the ancient Near East, there was a lot of covenants made, a lot of treaties made, different types made. And we have examples of those from the ancient world where we can look and, oh, this is the form that they took. This is how they did it. They did this and this and this and this. But it turns out that God made this covenant, this treaty, in a very similar way. And what that was doing for the people of Israel was it was allowing them to say, hey, I know what God's doing here. He's making a covenant with us. So they're understanding what God is doing. And here's the basic steps. And we actually can look at them from the verses. But in a covenant or a treaty that's made, the first thing you see is the statement of past relationships and acts. Actually, I think there's one before that. It's the, So you can look at the box here, it's probably better. There's the introduction of the speaker. So it identifies authority and his right to proclaim the treaty. And also, like, part of his identifying who he was, so this would be God identifying who he is. Part of it is him also saying, like, I am God your healer. I am God your whatever. Part of those statements were to identify to Israel, like, this is who I am to you. And so we get to this portion, and in verse, it's in verse, where was it? Yeah, verse 4, you can see it highlighted, chapter 19, verse 4. You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. This is God doing the forms of a covenant. He states the past actions and, like, all that he did that makes them, like, say, yeah, we want to enter into this covenant. The next thing that he would do, we can see it in verse 5 and 6, is the covenant benefits. So let's just read, like, God, he's saying, guys, if you agree to this, here's the benefits. And the Creator says, now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, I put this little thing in here, but the Hebrew word for its treasured possession there signifies not possession in general, but a precious possession, which one saves and one keeps. It's like gold or treasure. So God is saying, you are going to be, if you'll agree to this, you're going to be precious to me among all the nations. So that's some of the benefits. So you have the statement of past relationship, covenant benefits. There's the agreement to the terms of the covenant. So they have to say yes. They have to say, I do, right? Do they do that? It's up above. Verse 8, they agree. They say, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. This is so significant because nationally, Israel just said yes to the covenant. They just said, we will enter into this thing. Then the last thing, sort of the last thing, is the covenant. I forgot to put blessing, but covenant blessings and curses, which would be basically the consequences for not doing what you agreed to do in the covenant. And so that's not in this section, but later on we see that in other portions of Scripture, the covenant curses of the disagreement. Question. Let's say in this covenant agreement, they've just agreed to this. They said, yes, we'll do it. Yes, we'll keep our end. God said, I'm going to do this. They said, we're going to do this. We're going to walk in your ways, God. We're going to walk in your ways. Let's say one of the parties did not, let's say the Israelites, which they're going to do, they break or they don't keep their side of the covenant. If God is being faithful to the covenant, what's he going to do? He's being faithful to his side of the covenant.
He's gonna continue to pursue them and try to make amends.
He is going to continue to pursue them, right? But, so there's blessing for obedience, cursing for disobedience. God covenanted himself to that. If he's being faithful to his covenant, what would that look like if they disobeyed? What would he do?
Punishments.
He would bring the curses. He would bring the punishment. The problem that has occurred is that everybody looks on the curses that are brought on the Israelites, one of the greatest ones, that they're removed from their land. We talked about that. Everybody looks on that and says, God has divorced them and he's done away with Israel. They were just too bad. And they look at the covenant curses and say, God has broken his covenant. He has not broken his covenant. God has been faithful to his side of the covenant. There's an entire book of the Bible about an adulterous wife running from her husband, and that husband coming back and being faithful to draw his people back, draw his wife back, and always taking her back. What book of the Bible is that? Help me out. Is it Hosea? Yeah, where the prophet takes a prostitute and she runs off and he goes and gets her. She runs off, he goes and gets her. And the picture of that is God is in a marriage covenant with his people Israel, and they run off and they suffer the consequences, but God always brings them back. That's the point here. God is being faithful and he's judging them, but he's just being faithful to his side of the covenant. The rest of the Hebrew Bible, the rest of the Bible, is history of this relationship between them. Is God, or it's God saying, here's the consequences if you guys keep disobeying me. Or it's God saying, I'm going to deliver you from the consequences that I had to bring on you. Or it's them walking in obedience. That's the rest of the Bible, more or less. There's Proverbs and wisdom and stuff too. But the rest of the Bible is based on this agreement. So we got to get the weight. I know it's just chapter 19 and 20 and stuff. But we got to get the weight of this moment. He's entered into covenant. He has put his life on the line here. So, cool. So that's we go through it. The chapter 19 just says, God says, consecrate yourselves because I'm coming close. Change your garments. Don't have sexual relations with each other. I'm coming close. Be consecrated. And then Yahweh comes down and Moses acts as a mediator between the Lord and Israel. And so now we're just going back and forth and we're saying, here's my words, here's my laws, yes, we'll do it. It's a mediating agent. So that's chapter 19. Questions on this? The rest we're just going to kind of cruise through. But questions on what we just talked about?
I think one thought I have is, it's not really a question, but one thought,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of show the weight of it. You think ahead to when Jesus came and how hard they were holding on to this covenant, because everything they had was built on it.
Yeah. So question, I just want to ask this. Do you think they're holding on to it when Jesus came was wrong? So she just talked about when Jesus came, they were holding on tight to the covenant. Some were doing that wrongly. Was that wrong?
I feel like they should have realized, even since they know the covenant, then they kind of, especially Pharisees and Sadducees, they knew the Bible. That had been my first thought.
Mm-hmm.
So good. If that's the case, then they should have out of anyone noticed Abraham getting the goat instead of the lamb, for example. They know there's a coming salvation. So when they saw Jesus, I feel like they should have been oh, this is our covenant being fulfilled. This is it. Oh snap, this is it.
Yeah.
But instead they were oh, our covenant. The law is God instead of God made a law. So
Yeah. So that's them missing the Messiah. But their faithfulness to the law is actually really good. It's actually really good. Because that's the law of their covenant. Like, they're in covenant with their God. The issue, when Jesus came, was not, you guys are just all stuck up. Like, you're keeping this law, you need to move on. Come on. That wasn't the issue. The issue is they were keeping the law in a wrong manner. They weren't doing it right. Jesus came, the Word became flesh to show them, no, this is what God meant in that. He showed them the heart of it. In other words, you've heard it said, don't murder. I'm going to show you the heart of that. We don't even hate. So Jesus was asked, what's the 2 greatest commandments? And like, love God, love people. Love God, he quoted Deuteronomy 6. Love people, he quoted Leviticus 19. He's pointing back to the Torah, the law, and saying, this is what that was actually like, and you guys have walked away from the very heart of it. That was the real issue. That was the real issue. The reason they would go into judgment or be under Rome at all was because one of the covenant curses, we've talked about it, is if you don't walk in my ways, you're going to be removed from your land, or I'm going to put a harsh nation over you. So a harsh nation was over them, Rome, because they had not been walking in the covenant properly. Does that make sense? So law, instruction, good. Legalism bad. That's kind of, sort of what we should take away. There's actually a whole lot more legalism. There's probably less of that than we realized. But outward perfection, but inward yucky, bad. That was what Jesus came and hammered against. Hypocrisy. So, thank you for bringing that up. And good, yeah, way to catch that. So, you know, we gotta cruise through this, but the law codes are basically the things they were supposed to agree to. We start in chapter 20 with the 10 Commandments. 10 Commandments. The first commandment was, you shall have no other gods before me. And the second one was, don't have any idols. Notice those are different. We always think, no other gods, that means don't have a statue. But now we understand, oh, he's talking about don't worship any of the divine beings and don't make statues. 2 different things. Makes sense? And then 21 through 23 is the book of the covenant. It's basically just more of the laws. One interesting verse I found that I wanted to bring out to us, a couple verses at the end of chapter 23. The Lord says, as he closes up the rules of the covenant, the laws of the covenant, he said, behold, I send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you into the place that I have prepared. Pay careful attention to him. Pay careful attention to this angel. To obey, and obey his voice. Do not be rebellious against him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. My name is in this angel. Now, we're talking about like blatant, unrepentant sin. He's not going to just pardon you guys for continuing to rebel against me. But notice what it says. My name is going to be in this angel that's going before you. Like, I think we're supposed to see stuff like this and like, what does it mean that God's name is in this guy? But if you carefully obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. Later in the Bible, who was God's name in? Yeah, Jesus. I mean, like, he came and manifested the name. So this angel is, I'm just going to spill the beans, is probably a prefigurement of Jesus. That's what we're seeing, the angel of the Lord. Possibly this angel too. So, yeah, so pretty crazy. Then last chapter, the covenant is officially ratified. And again, we go through the course of basic ancient Near Eastern. Moses recounts the words of the covenant. He comes back down. So the first time, God had said a few things, but now Moses has gone up and did it talk about it in chapter 19 that he was up there for 40 days? Is that chapter 19?
I don't remember what chapter, I remember reading it.
Yeah. I don't think it's at the end of this one. But yeah, it's at the end of 24, I think. Anyway, somewhere in here, Moses gets the law. God gives him the Torah. And he comes back down again. He recounts the words of the covenant. The people agree to the terms of the covenant. Sacrifices were made in ancient covenants. And actually, I think the whole cutting the animals in half, I think that happened again here. If I'm under, it doesn't recount it, but I think that's what happens even in these covenants. And so again, we know the animals are cut down the middle, and the parties walk in between saying, my life is bound to this. So God, once again, is binding his life to this nation. And then the blood is sprinkled on the book and the people. They're sprinkled with the blood of the covenant, which is, I forget exactly the significance of that, but it's just part of the blood of the covenant is put on the book of the law, and then on the people, and it's like the life-binding nature of that. And then in those covenants, a meal is shared between the elders of Israel and the Lord. In ancient covenants, in an ancient biblical world, covenants were normally concluded with a special covenant meal, in which the animals were symbolically cut in half, symboling the two parties. Then the parties to the covenant walked between the pieces, and the meal together was a sign of friendship and alliance. So God, usually two parties had a meal together. So Moses and the elders, they go up on the mountain. They see the God of Israel. There's a pavement underneath them. Y'all remember that part? And they have a meal. They have a meal before the Lord. Moses and the elders. So really cool how the Lord is they're familiar. Moses and them and Israel are familiar with covenants. And God just goes in the pattern of it to show them how serious he is about this agreement. So then God gives Moses the tablets, and then Moses goes up to receive the instruction of the Lord, and the Lord comes down on the mountain. And this is what's called a theophany, where God appears on the mountain. And there's I think in chapter 19, there's a horn blown as the Lord came near. Yeah, and the mountain shakes, and it's crazy. Very scary sight. But
I just think about God. He literally could just wipe everything and start fresh if he wanted to. He would rather enjoy the creation he's already made, and persevere through the hardships of them leaving their side of the covenant, having to establish all this just out of this great love, that we can't even get to understand. It's just so cool to see Moses and elders eating with God, or just all this stuff that nowadays we're we still they were with God.
They were with God.
It's crazy. So cool.
Yeah, the dynamics of this covenant reveals something about God to us. He's a relational being. He is a relational being. When I teach through the covenants, I always am nervous because I'm this is always the most boring part, it seems like. And I always have a chore to try and communicate the significance of these moments. But this is a massively significant moment in the life of Israel. And again, the rest of the Bible is based on these moments and these agreements. So it's on our timeline. But yeah, so creation, corruptions, covenants.